Welcome everyone to video 1.2. It's part 3 of 10 of the tax company PC. We've been working on this for a little while. We've gone back and forth. So at this particular point, we just received a email back from good old Bill, our customer, and he just replied with these answers. So at this point, we know that it is a business that used to be a home-based business, but now it's becoming more a larger business, so to speak, or just growing a little bit. So he's hiring a few employees. It's 1,000 square feet, so it's a small office, but he's hiring some employees. So that's gonna change things up a little bit because it's always a lot simpler if it's just a single-person company. But when you hire extra people, there are always just more things to think about and just more technology that you need to. Just simply the fact that you would need, something as basic as more laptops for those employees, things like that. And then, so here's a perfect example as far as the internet and phone service. He's saying that, he wants to use the Wi-Fi that is provided by the landlord, so more of a shared Wi-Fi. And that's generally a really bad idea because you really have no control over the quality, because at this point the landlord may have 10 people on it, it might be 2 people, it might be 100 people. You have no idea. I mean, it sounds cool because it's only $20 a month, but really you got to weigh that out. If you've got a few people trying to do work and the quality of the connection is really poor and they keep on getting disconnected or have high latency and things of that nature, then they may not be able to do their job, and that might actually cost you way more than what you're saving by trying to go on the cheap and just getting this $20 a month. So that's a serious red flag that I would have a conversation with that customer about. You always want to have good infrastructure for your business, so that you don't want the infrastructure to become a bottleneck where it's causing you to do things slower or not allow your employees to work efficiently. And infrastructure is a term that you'll hear a lot. It's just basically like things like the network. It's the underlying parts of your business that kind of like electrical, right? You don't want to have electrical at your house or your business go out all the time because you just count on it. It's the foundation, right? You always have to have electrical, you always have to have internet, you always have to have phone service, your applications should always work, things like that. So it's just things you want your employees to have a very stable environment so that they don't even have to think about that kind of stuff. And then as far as the website, so it looks like, they want to at least talk about it now, so that's good. This is a good sign that he's saying, I assumed it would be too cost prohibitive. So cost prohibitive just means that he thought it would cost too much. Prohibitive meaning he didn't think he'd be able to do it. But the fact that he's saying let's talk about it is a good sign. And then we talked about the business email. So he's saying that, he didn't think it was a huge ordeal that he was using Gmail, but he would rather, by the way I'm reading this, is like he would like to have business email because he's just saying it can't hurt. So when people say things like that, like, oh, I guess it can't hurt to do this, or I'm open to talking about it, or let's talk about it, to me, that just means that the customer just needs a little bit more education and, they more or less want to do it, right? Because if you really don't want to do something, you're going to be like, you know what, I don't want to talk about business email. I'm perfectly happy with Gmail. But when someone really wants to do something, they just want a little nudge and they want to have a little convincing or a little education on it, they'll say things like, oh, let me think about it, or let's talk about it, or I'm open to it, or I just need some more info, or things like that. So let's see. So here we're talking about the fact of whether they want a PC or a laptop, basically right here. So he's saying that he would think that he wants a desktop because it's a better, so you'll hear this value for money a lot. So that's just literally saying like, what's the better deal? And actually, this is one of the few things that Bill is actually completely right. I mean, generally, a desktop is going to be cheaper than a laptop, even if you compare, and I'm going to use a term you hear a lot in the business world, apples for apples, meaning if you were to compare the features of a desktop and the features of a laptop, like a desktop with the same processor and RAM and hard drive is going to be cheaper than a laptop with the same specs because it's actually cheaper to make desktops, right? Laptops are just more expensive technology to make. Now we're getting into the software, right? Because honestly, most companies, like even whether they're a really small company or a large company, the users really care about the software, right? I mean, they could really care less in a lot of ways of what type of processor they have or how much RAM or whatever. Most of the time they're just thinking that it's a tool. It's just a thing that I use to do work. So what am I actually doing when I'm using this computer? I'm using QuickBooks. I'm using ADP. I'm using some tax software. I'm using Microsoft Office. I'm using Adobe or whatever I'm doing, right? So this is actually things that they more care about. The specs of the computer and things like that, that's your job to explain to the customer as to why that's important, because they may not realize that having something like a solid state drive is going to make their job go much faster because solid state drives are faster than traditional drives, or having 8 gigs of RAM is going to allow your applications like your Excel spreadsheets or your web browser or whatnot to run that much faster, so you can do more in a day and get more done. They may know it. I mean, especially with users becoming more knowledgeable these days, especially, people, the younger generation tend to understand some of the technology a little bit better, but, you don't want to make that assumption. So you always want to, try and take an opportunity to educate the customer. And Bill definitely does not seem to understand technology that great. It doesn't mean he's not intelligent. It's just, he just doesn't understand technology, right? Just like you may go to an auto mechanic and you may not know much about cars, but it doesn't mean you're not intelligent. You just have never studied cars. So the mechanic's job at that point is to explain to you what you should do about your car and, what makes sense and how much it's going to cost and things like that, right? That's the value that you're looking for from a mechanic. And as an IT professional, the customer is looking for you to educate them so that they know why they need something or how much money to spend on something, things of that nature. Now, so when it comes to sales cycle related things like search engine optimization, it has to do with when you go and you Google something. So for example, if I had opened up Google and I had typed something like tax advice Minneapolis, a bunch of different things are going to come up, right? So these are the tax people or the accountants or tax filers that are going to come up in Minneapolis for a search engine search, right? So this is technically, potentially a bunch of revenue for these companies, because if I click on this link and I end up calling them and they end up doing my taxes, well, they would have never gotten that business if it wasn't for them having the right SEO, right? So the search engine optimization. So Sunberg Tax, they have obviously done some work with SEO in the way that they wrote their website. So the coding of their website has been updated so that they came up on this search. Basically, they were like one of the first people. So that's just an example. So if Bill wanted to have his website, which of course he has to have a website first, which he doesn't, but let's say he wants to have a website, does he want to actually come up on search engines to have people that are searching for tax advice, does he want to come up? And really it's an individual thing. Some customers might just think that they're perfectly fine because they've got plenty of customers and they rely on word of mouth and they don't care about SEO. So there is no wrong or right answer. Really, it just depends on the particular customer. This is one of those examples where I honestly would not bug Bill about this because he's clearly saying that he does not want to talk about SEO, and also this is a huge it's not a red flag, but it's basically something you really want to pay attention to. Uh, we've obviously asked him a lot of questions, and Bill is starting to get overwhelmed, which just means that he's, feeling that this is just so many questions. He doesn't really know what to do with all these questions because he may not actually understand it perfectly, or he's just feeling that some of these questions are maybe unnecessary or whatever it is, right? I mean, we are emotional beings at the end. So even though we're trying to make these logical business decisions or whatever, you do want to pay attention to how the customer is feeling and the wording they're using. So to me, this is a clear indication that we should really get on a phone call, because that's also more personal. So whatever concerns Bill has, we can probably explain it a lot better in a verbal conversation than an email. So that's something to learn as far as when you do a phone call versus when you do an email. I do like email as far as gathering this type of data, because this is really useful. The fact that we have all this information in an email, we can now refer back to this. We could send this off to someone. A phone call, on the other hand, is great for going into detail in a way that you can't in a way on email. You also can't read emotions and things like that very well in an email. So there are certain things that phone calls are great at, but the downside with the phone call is nothing is documented. So you have no paper trail is a term you'll hear. You'll have no audit trail, which is just saying like you have no track record of what's happened, or paper trail meaning it's not written anywhere. Let's see, do you have any additional employees? So this is huge. He's saying he's going to have 3 additional employees, which really makes a lot of sense, because up here he was saying that he's going to have 1,000 extra square feet. So it would be kind of silly if he said he hired 1 employee and they wouldn't really need even 1,000 square feet, right? So it makes sense if he's hiring 3 employees. I mean, you would need about 1,000 square feet. And then printing, he's saying he has a LaserJet 4100 printer, which is kind of an older printer, but maybe it'll be fine. It works well for black and white printing. That's B&W. So it is connected to my old laptop. So that is a little bit of a red flag to me, because if it's just physically connected to one of his old laptops, that isn't conducive of multiple people printing to it, because in order for those 3 other people, so it'll be 4 people total, because he hired 3 additional, so it'll be Bill and 3 people. So those 4 people, in order for them to print really without bothering each other, the printer would have to be on the network. So that's something we'll have to talk to him about. And then how is scanning and faxing handled? So currently he has a phone line at home, which is it's fairly common for people that have a single person home-based business, where they'll just have a phone line connected to an old fax machine. So the fact that, again, he's saying this is a good question, let's talk about it, that means that obviously he wants you to come up with a solution, but they may not always say like, hey, I want you to come up with a solution. He's just saying, let's talk about a solution, which is honestly the same thing. You just have to learn how to read into how, customers communicate. So that's just something to keep in mind. So when I usually see these types of emails, I'm trying to look at, like factual, hard data, like things like this, that he's paying this much per, or he's thinking about using this somewhat crazy, free, cheap Wi-Fi solution, which we know is going to be an issue. The fact that he hired 3 people, the fact that he's got these exact pieces of software written on here. So these are like exact pieces of data, right, that we can write down. And then you also want to read into some of the intangible, like softer parts about this, right? So like the fact that he's open to, using company email, because it's saying it can't hurt to have a domain, right? So that's, like something that says it can't hurt to have a domain is really more, in my opinion, saying like, I'm interested in hearing about it. They're not closed off to it. Because if he had been closed off to it, he would have been like, hey, I'm not interested in a domain whatsoever, right? But you can read into this like he's afraid of getting nickeled and dimed to death, which is just literally just saying that he's afraid that the cost is going to be too much, right? So, but that's something you can handle well because if you explain it well to him, you can explain that, hey, you know, it might cost you a little bit of money, but your return on investment or your ROI may be far greater than what you actually spend. So that's some of the value you can add, right? So those are things that I'm, you know, taking in. Things like this printer being older and it's not connected to the network. That's a factor. We'll have to at least make some recommendations. You know, maybe black and white is fine for him, or maybe he's not considering that with the additional employees that maybe some of them will be making promotional material and they need to be color or what have you. You never know. Obviously, you know, being that he's moving from his home to an office, and if they need to fax, which by the way, a lot of people think it's crazy or they don't understand why in the world you need to fax anymore. It's still needed because, for example, every government office, if you have to send them information, they'll have you fax things in. And it's not just because they're old fashioned, it's because it's also very secure. Faxes are basically almost impossible to intercept. Emails are actually not that difficult to intercept. So if you have incredibly confidential data like tax information, faxing it is actually very secure. Even though it's a little bit old-fashioned, it still does work. So there are reasons people still use fax machines. It's not just because they're old. There's actually a bunch of other reasons. I'm just going to give you one for now. So at this point, if I've read this correctly, you know, I have a bunch of things that I can document. So I kind of just wrote this up ahead of time in that cooking show style. So this is the way that I do it. It's something that I also suggest for you because I go like this and I'll usually type up Notepad. I'll go into the search and I type Notepad. And Notepad is just a very, very simple thing. It's kind of like Microsoft Word, but just a very, very simple version of it. And it's just a quick way to put some thoughts down, right? And this is just more for myself. I would never send a customer this. This is just more for me to organize my own thoughts. And then generally, once I have my thoughts organized, I will put together a much nicer document that I'll actually send to the customer. So this is just more like some simple notes like, okay, he doesn't have a website. He doesn't have corporate email. He has an older printer. He did say that downtime would be impactful. So even though he didn't think of anything to do with redundancy or quality of his technology that he wants, he did say that downtime would be impactful. So impactful meaning like if the computer wasn't available, for example, that he's putting in the tax information on, then he wouldn't be able to do his job and the customer wouldn't be able to meet with him, right? So sometimes customers don't really understand that what they're doing is really critical to their business, so that if they lose a laptop or a desktop that they're currently doing something on, if they can't do that anymore, how much money does that cost them, right? So that's all part of like assessing the impact. So, but a lot of times like people just don't think of that as a variable when they purchase something. They don't think of like, hey, this thing may be really cheap, but it's not redundant at all, or it doesn't have any backup in it. So what happens if it breaks? They more just think of the fact that, hey, it's really cheap, let's buy it. I don't want to spend this extra money on this thing. They don't calculate, hey, what does it cost if that super cheap laptop that has the really poor quality hard drive that could easily fail, what does that cost if I lose all that data? You know, maybe I saved $200 on the laptop, but now I have to spend thousands on recovering the data, or maybe I even can't, right? So just things like that. That's part of what you as an IT professional need to think about. And you also need to phrase it in a way where you don't want to lecture the customer and you don't want to make them feel bad, because you're educating them, right? So you have to do it in a nice way and in an educational way. You can't say things like, well, why are you trying to be cheap and save that money on the laptop? You should buy this nicer laptop because it's just better. You don't want to just say open-ended terms like it's just better or worse. You want to stay away from opinion. You want to stick with facts as much as possible. You need to quantify that information, right? You need to say something along the lines of, well, you know what? You could get this laptop that's $300, but pull up a website that shows the reviews on that, hard drive and say the reviews on this hard drive is really bad. And if you look at these reviews, it shows that this hard drive, for example, is failing a lot. So what would be the impact of that hard drive failing is you would lose all your data. So therefore you want to get a better laptop that maybe is a little bit more expensive, but that extra cost will be saved tenfold by not having to deal with all those issues, right? Things like that. So no phone system, that is, I'm pretty sure is going to be an issue, because if Bill was just working at home in the past and he had just his cell phone, which that's what he said, that would work for him. But, how is he going to have these other three employees ever do any work for him, right? They got to be able to call customers. They got to be able to receive calls. I mean, having each of them use their personal cell phone to do business is probably not a good idea either, because what if, their personal cell phone coverage isn't very good, or maybe they don't have enough minutes, or what if their voicemail isn't set up, or things of that nature, right? How would he control the quality if he's reliant on people using their personal stuff for business, right? You want to generally provide a phone system for your employees so that you can control the quality of their work. You want to make sure that their perception to the outside world for your own customers is good, right? You want to have them have voicemail. You want to have them have a system that's always working, things like that. And also, a lot of people don't want to use their personal cell phone for work and things like that too. One of the biggest ones was the shared Wi-Fi. I can totally see why a customer would find it attractive to just only pay $20 a month and use a shared Wi-Fi for that whole building, but I can guarantee you that will have a lot of issues, because the moment you get a bunch of people that have just a shared Wi-Fi, you have no idea if they're going to sit there and download music all day and take up all the bandwidth, or if that particular wireless access point is what they call oversubscribed, which means that it's really designed for like 2 people, but there's 20 people on it, so it's going to just have horrible quality and you're going to get disconnected. You have no control, right? So in a shared environment, you have no control. And maybe if it was just Bill, who was just working out of this office, he might be able to deal with it. But when you have 3 other employees that are trying to do work, and nowadays if you don't have internet, you pretty much can't do work because you're always emailing or researching things and whatnot. So you do not want to have that infrastructure be poor and have no control over it. So I would highly recommend that he gets a separate internet circuit and his own Wi-Fi so that he can control the quality of the environment that his employees have. The desktop makes sense that he was saying he wants to have a desktop because he wants to run QuickBooks. He wants to run the desktop version of QuickBooks instead of the cloud-based version of QuickBooks, is what he said on a previous email. So that's just something to keep in mind. On a previous email, he said he wants to get QuickBooks Professional, which is the desktop version, like I said. He talked about the tax planning software, which was called Lacert, in one of his previous emails. He said he wants to use ADP for payroll. He talked about Microsoft Office and how he wants to. He said that he had an older version of Office, but you can't just reuse it on multiple computers. You have to actually buy a license for it and the software to legally own it. He talked about the desktop printer, that the HP LaserJet, which isn't currently on the network, so we would need to see if it can support a network card in it. Faxing would be bundled with the phone system, so since he needs a phone system also, we can just bundle the faxing into it. We need to recommend the desktop specs. You'll hear the word specs a lot, which is just specifications, which is just saying like, whatever parts are in this device, like what are they and why, right? Like what kind of hard drive, what kind of RAM, those are all the specs, right? So we need to explain the specs as to why we recommend this particular desktop to this customer. And then one thing we haven't asked him yet, and he didn't explain, is what are these other three employees actually going to do for their job? Like you don't want to make an assumption that just because they're working for a tax company that they're all accountants or that they're all going to be doing taxes. I mean, one of those people might be a marketing person or might be working in Adobe Photoshop or doing video editing or something like that, which would be completely different from someone who's just using Microsoft Word and Excel and writing emails all day. So if someone is all they're doing is using Word and Excel and writing emails, you could get a very low-end laptop. But if someone is doing a bunch of video editing and doing graphics and things like that, you might have to get a higher-end laptop. So knowing what they actually do for their job is a very important thing. So that's something that we'll have to ask Bill before we can make a final solution. And then a UPS is a uninterrupted power supply. So since he's going to have the desktop version of QuickBooks, and that's going to be really important for his job or his company, an uninterrupted power supply is something that I highly recommend. And it's not something that customers are generally going to think about, but power is something that you really don't want to have affect your infrastructure or your stability of your business. So, for example, let's say that for some reason the power goes out, which happens, right? We've all been in like winter storms or things like that where you lose power. Well, it will happen at some point in the year, right? Maybe just once or twice. But if your desktop is running this really important software and all of a sudden the operating system just crashes because the computer was shut off inappropriately just because of a power outage, well, you don't want to corrupt some data, right? So you want to have a UPS that you can use so that if the power goes out for a couple of minutes, the UPS is basically like a battery. So think of it like your laptop, right? Your laptop has a battery built in, so if you unplug from the wall, if you lose power, the battery kicks in and the laptop is still on, right? So a UPS is kind of like a battery for a desktop, so that if it loses power, it still stays on for a little while, so that you can shut it down properly. And I'd say that's about what I'm thinking through as the customer at this point, or sorry, as the manager. Depends on if the manager is technical or not. Most managers of a IT department generally were technical at one point. They've just now gone down the management route. So this is just what I would think of as a manager. But depending on who the manager is, they may not think of all this stuff, and they may just have you, the technician, figure these things out. So this is just something to think about. So as far as the scenario is concerned, so at this point, the manager, Ted, has figured out that it just really makes sense to talk to Bill at this point. So the manager's at this point going to talk to Bill and try to get on a phone call and explain everything to Bill. So as the scenario goes, which I've actually written out here completely, so at this point a phone call is going to be initiated by Ted by seeing that Bill needs further details. And then after that, once we educate the customer and all their questions have been answered, then we can kind of move on to the next step, which is to engage the technician, right? So trainee 01 is the technician that's going to actually do this work. So the customer just wants to make sure that, the manager wants to make sure that the customer is happy first before they engage the technician that's going to do the work. Because really the technician may not be the best person to really answer those high-level questions from the customer. You want to basically make sure that the customer is at least willing to pay and is open to this project before you engage the employee or technician to do the work. So we're going to do a little role-playing thing. So I'm going to go ring, ring, ring. I'm going to call up Bill. And yes, Bill has a very deep voice because I want to differentiate Bill's voice from the manager Ted's voice. So, yes, this is Bill here. What can I do for you? Hey Bill, this is Ted. I wanted to just talk and discuss this email and make sure that all of your questions are answered. So, is this a good time? Yes, I can talk for a little while. No problem at all. Great. Thanks, Bill. I appreciate that. So, Bill, I was looking at the last email that you sent, and yeah, it sounds like some exciting things are going on with your business. Yes, it definitely is. And yeah, it sounds like you're expanding. You're hiring 3 people. It looks like, which is great. You talked about the email as far as the fact that you're currently using the Gmail account. You did mention that you might be interested in at least discussing the concept of using a company email. Yeah, I'm open to it. I don't know if I am crazy about it, but you tech people know this stuff, so just let me know what you think. Yeah, definitely, no problem. So, yeah, I mean, there's also the different software that you brought up. So, QuickBooks Pro, you mentioned ADP for payroll. You mentioned, I believe you pronounce it Lacert for the tax software. Oh, yes, that's what it is. Lacert's a really good piece of software, so yep, no problem. Oh, great. No problem. We can definitely help with figuring out, what the right desktop would be to make sure all the software would work well. And then, of course, Microsoft Office. Everyone in the world pretty much uses Microsoft Office, so that's no problem. Now, one thing I did want to mention is, you said you had this Office 2012 that was on a different laptop. Um, Technically, you can't really reuse it because you have to actually buy a legitimate version of Office for every computer that you're using for your business. Oh, okay. I was just not sure. So thanks for clarifying. Yep, no problem, Bill. So yeah, as far as this other software, I didn't mean to just kind of like throw too many things at you. So I apologize if these questions were just kind of overwhelming. We just have a template of things that we always ask customers. So forgive me if it was a little overwhelming. Oh, no problem. I'm just not a big tech guy. I just want to, help my customers with their taxes. That's just what I'm passionate about. You know what I mean? Oh yeah, I mean, leave the tech stuff to us. No problem at all. I understand. So yeah, I mean, these are things that we'll just throw in there. The Adobe is free. The Chrome stuff is free, obviously. Now, malware and virus things, those are just things that we recommend because what you don't want to have happen is you don't want to have just something that you overlook by missing malware or virus software and have it, potentially damage your software like your tax software and lose records because of it or affect customers' data. You've heard things like the Target security leak and things like that, right? So I mean, I'm not trying to scare you or anything, but I mean those are real. You can have lots of issues if you don't have malware and virus protection, and really they are fairly cost effective. So it really is something that we highly, highly recommend that every customer does because it just is really nice to have that peace of mind and know that nothing will affect the safety of your data and your customers' data too, really. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I guess I've never really messed around with any kind of malware or whatnot. I don't think I've ever had a virus, but you're right. I'm going to have new employees also, so I should really be safe about these types of things. So, yeah, thank you for that. Yep, no problem. And then remote access, I noticed that you didn't really respond to that one. I'd like to just take a minute and explain what I meant by that. So, if that's okay with you. Yeah, yeah, go ahead, no problem. Okay, so yeah, I mean, VPN is just a thing that you can do. It stands for Virtual Private Network. So it just basically means that you can, over the internet, connect to your office and access the QuickBooks software, for example, because that will be sitting on well, I mean, at this point, the design that I'm thinking about will involve a desktop computer with QuickBooks Pro on it. So to be able to access it from home, the easiest way is going to be to VPN, and not necessarily the easiest way, the most secure way, I should say. So VPN is just something that we would, at that point, enable on your internet connection at the office. So I just wanted to mention that to you, that's all that was. Okay, yeah, I mean, I guess, does that mean that I wouldn't be able to access the QuickBooks otherwise, or would I just have to go to the office? Yeah, so literally that's it. So if you want to just use QuickBooks when you're at the office, then yeah, you could do that. But if you want to ever access it from home, or if you're on vacation, you want to connect to it remotely, then you would have to VPN. There are some other ways that you could access it remotely without VPN, but VPN really is the safest way to do it, so I highly recommend it. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, you're the expert. I think I'll just, listen to whatever solution you have, because I honestly don't know anything about VPN or any of this stuff. So whatever allows me and my employees to do our job, access to QuickBooks, that's really all that matters to me. Okay, well, thanks, Bill. I appreciate that. No problem. We'll make sure you're well taken care of. As far as backing up data and things like that, I noticed that you didn't really answer that question. Now, did you have certain thoughts about that before I make any recommendations? Honestly, I haven't done a lot with backup. I think maybe a USB stick connected to my old laptop is about as much as I know about backup. So, yeah, I mean, I would be open to hearing your thoughts about that. Yep, no problem. And honestly, that is a way of backup. So if a USB stick and connecting it and backing up your data that way works for you, that would be just fine. The only thing I would say is that it requires someone to remember to do that, and we all know that we get busy, so it's susceptible to just forgetting, and also you may not do it right sometimes if you're busy or whatnot, and then maybe you didn't back up all the data that you intended or things like that. There are just some really easy ways, especially nowadays. Things are so affordable and the technologies are out there, like using cloud backup software is really easy and reliable now, and it's actually fairly cheap too. So I think I would go down that route, just because it's just one less thing you need to worry about, especially because you're growing and you have to now worry about more than just yourself. You've got employees, so I would highly suggest that we look into some kind of cloud backup software or cloud storage in general. How does that sound, Bill? Yeah, I mean, that sounds good. I guess I haven't really looked into cloud stuff so much, but yeah, I mean, I've heard of those things, using Google Drive or whatever. Yeah, just haven't done much of it myself, but yeah, that makes sense. Thanks. Yep, no problem. I'll make sure, we cover that in more detail later. This was just more of a initial call to just kind of go over the high level of what I saw in this email, and just to make sure you had the opportunity to ask any follow-up questions and things like that. So yeah, I guess the next thing was regarding the life cycle stuff, the sales life cycle. I totally understand that SEO may not be something that is that important to your business right now. So, but I just wanted to throw it out there and just see if you were interested. For some businesses it's important, for others it's not. So. Sounds like you're perfectly fine with the number of customers you have, and you're not necessarily looking to come up on search engine results. If for example, if someone searched tax advice Minneapolis. Oh, well, I don't know. I mean, I guess you could never be unhappy with more customers, but at this point. I do have quite a few customers because I've been, in business for so long with just myself, and I think I'll definitely have enough customers to keep everyone busy, and I'm fairly happy with that. But
it's good to know that your company could do the search engine optimization work if we needed to in the future. But yeah, I think right now I'm pretty happy with just kind of skipping that stuff for now until a further date. So let's just do that for now.
Yep, no problem, Bill. That's just fine by me. And then, yeah, you mentioned the three additional employees. Congratulations, by the way. I mean, expansion is generally a good thing, so that's awesome. Do you mind just kind of sharing with me as far as what those three employees are actually going to do, or their roles and responsibilities? And just so you know, the reason I'm asking is just so that I can make sure that whatever solution we put into place will help those people to do their jobs better, so that we can help your company as the best that we can.
Oh yeah, no problem at all. So yeah, the three people that I'm hiring, they're all actually accountants. So one person is fairly entry level, and he's going to do more of a general assistant slash reception type of role, even though he did just graduate with a accounting degree. The other two folks, they're pretty seasoned accountants, and they actually are bringing their own book of business to the company too. So it's a huge asset for me to be able to hire these folks, because honestly, I've just got way too many customers right now to be able to handle on my own. So I needed to bring in extra employees. So yeah, I don't know if that answers everything you needed or whatnot, but yeah, they're all going to be accountants in one way or another.
Oh, okay, yeah, that actually was exactly what I was looking for, so I appreciate that. So, yeah, I guess that helps me a ton to figure out what they would need also. So, the next question I had was really about the printing, just to clarify that. The HP LaserJet printer, you said, which, yeah, I mean, those printers have been around forever, so I totally understand why you have one of those. You mentioned that it does black and white printing. Is that something that you are interested in staying with, or does color printing at all matter to your business? And then another question is, you mentioned that it's connected to your old laptop. So I guess the second question would be, are you going to still have that old laptop? And do you want everyone to be able to print, or just you?
Oh yeah, I guess I didn't really think about that, but yeah, I would definitely want everyone to be able to print. I mean, I don't want to become a bottleneck for printing, so no, yeah, we need to figure out a way that we can all print to that printer, whatever works, honestly.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that's fine. As far as printing in general, we could, I'm sure, figure out a very simple way to connect that printer to the network, so that everyone can print to it without needing to, bother you to print things, or things of that nature. But as far as the color, is that something that you need? I'm just curious.
Every now and then I want to print something in color if we're trying to do a flyer or something like that, but that's maybe once a year. 99.9% of the time, all I'm doing is printing, things like tax documents, which anyone could tell you is not very exciting.
Yeah, definitely, Bill.
So, yeah, I mean, anyway, yeah, just black and white's all I really need.
All right, thanks for clarifying, Bill. That definitely makes sense. I just wanted to ask, so we can just basically skip any color printing related stuff. And then as far as fax, you mentioned that you have a phone line at home and that you have an old fax machine. So I guess my question for you is, do you need to continue to fax at the new office, and is it just, one person that's going to fax? Is it just you, or does everyone need to fax, or how important is faxing just in general?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question also. It is actually important because we do have to fax in documents to the IRS and the state of Minnesota for tax compliance, and even a lot of our customers have to fax in information to us. So it's very important. And yeah, I guess I would be open to hearing what would work the best for our solution to be able to have everyone fax. So yeah, just let me know.
Yep, yeah, I can definitely do that. My role within the company is to make sure that I address the high level questions that you have, but to be honest, I'm not necessarily the most technical person. I used to be technical, so I would rather leave that to the experts. So I have one of the technicians I'm going to engage into this project. So I want to introduce you to him, and he can kind of go into a lot of those details. I think I've definitely got most of the questions answered that I needed to, so I think we're in a really good spot, and I think we can definitely do a great job for you and provide a solution that will hopefully do everything that you need and then some. So I think I'm in a pretty good spot. How about you, Bill? I mean, do you have any other questions? And if you do, yeah, please feel free to fire away. Let me know if you have any thoughts or questions.
Yeah, I mean, I guess at this point, I like the way that you've explained everything. It makes a lot of sense to me. I would like to hear more details as far as, costs and exactly what desktop or whatever that we need. I don't really know what the, process looks like, what are the next steps or whatnot. But yeah, at this point, I feel pretty good.
Okay, well, thanks, Bill. I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, the next steps would be to have a kickoff call with my technician, and he will be up to speed as far as all of the information we've gathered so far, so you don't need to worry about having to repeat yourself with everything you've explained to me. So I'll make sure I update him with all this information, and then you'll work directly with him moving forward as far as he'll be putting together a proposal, and then we'll just kind of follow the whole project life cycle from there. So that's basically the steps. Does that make sense? And do you have any other further questions?
Let me think. No, I think I'm actually pretty good right now. I look forward to hearing back from you as far as the next steps. Yeah, thank you, Ted.
Yep, no problem, Bill. Thank you. I appreciate your working with us and your patience through this whole process. So we'll send out a meeting invite shortly, and I'll introduce you to the technician, and we'll just kind of go from there. Have a great day.
You too. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, so that was our little fun role-playing exercise of what you would have, had a conversation with the customer. And keep in mind, this isn't necessarily what a help desk person would do. In fact, it's not what a help desk person would do. You wouldn't manage a whole project like this. This is a customer and a manager, and you're playing all these roles. But really, this is just to understand the background of what happens in a company, and also just to give you some ideas of different technologies and how companies use technologies, and just to give you a broader viewpoint into why companies use these different technologies and things like that, and also just from a corporate communication standpoint. It's hard to give you kind of a broad perspective and give you lots of practice at writing emails and things like that if we were to only focus on things like tickets and things like that. So this is arguably overkill, because I'm teaching you more like a true project here, which is more the next level of being almost an analyst type of role. So this is somewhat advanced, so I don't want you to be intimidated here thinking that, oh my God, I need to know how to do project work and know all this stuff, because further on I'm going to explain how you actually research all this stuff, and you'll see that you can basically Google anything and you can find out all these details. So it's really not that big of a deal. And keep in mind, this is not what you'll be doing as a help desk person. You'll be handling basic troubleshooting and working with customers, but this is more to give you just tons of experience at writing emails and understanding business needs and things like that, and also gives you the opportunity to see what more advanced roles look like, so that you can advance yourself further in your career. So that's just more of a little background so that you didn't get concerned with what was just going on. So at this point, I'm going to move on and move to the next phase of this, which is basically the manager engaging the technician, which is trainee 01. Again, it's going to be trainee XX, so whatever trainee number you are. So I'm going to send an email from the manager to trainee 01 and kind of go from there. So here I am logged in as the manager. So I've got this email from the customer that I just went over before, so now I'm going to send a new email. I'm going to paste it in here. Thought I was pasting it in there. Apparently it got stuck. Yeah, sometimes it does this not responding thing. It's because I'm pasting from a Word document, so sometimes it just takes a second. So there we go, it's fine. So we're wanting to send an email to trainee 01. And remember, trainee 01 is the person that's actually going to be doing the work, right? So this is the technician. So I've already got this pre-written out. I want you to take some time and pause this and write this manually yourself. I'm just doing this in the cooking show style just to save some time. So just make sure you literally pause this, write this whole thing out, including this part. And notice I want to make sure that it's formatted right. I like to separate things out by little paragraphs, and I don't like things like that where it's bunched up. It's just not as professional. So just write this whole email out exactly like this, and then you'll want to have a subject. So I'm going to say Bill's Tax Haven Project. So I'm just going to send this out. And now at this point, the manager has sent trainee 01 the email that basically says that, if we were to look at it, it's, and I'm going to my sent email here just so you can see it. You're explaining that, it's a company named Bill Tax Haven, the person's name is Bill Hicks, and that you've gone through some discovery emails and phone calls with him, and that, he originally thought it was a tax business that just needed a PC, but now, they need further details, and, that you're feeling good about the project, that you'll be putting together a statement of work and some other documents, which will explain what all these are later on, and that you should keep them up to date. So then that will also be having a kickoff call. And the next thing that you'll typically do as a manager is you're going to take and you're going to forward this whole email trail, right? As far as all these emails, you're going to take and forward that to trainee 01 also. So I'm going to send it to trainee 01, and I'm going to say FYI for context and background. So this is the thing that you should do. Like if you've been working on something and you want to know, or you want to pass that information on to someone else, you need to forward that whole email chain to whoever you want to engage into the project. So I'm going to forward that over to trainee 01. And so at this point, trainee 01 is going to receive this email, which again, I can't have trainee 01 on the same browser because I can't be logged into my Transcend email to two different Transcend emails on the same browser. So I needed to use a different browser. So I'm going to switch over to Firefox, and now you can see as trainee 01, I've received two emails. One is this email, like we just said, where you were engaged by your manager, who's Ted Trainee. he's explaining to you about this project that you're going to be working on and that you're going to be putting together all these documents, which we'll explain later. And then here you've got this email about all this background about the project. So you can scroll down and basically see the whole thing from soup to nuts, in other words, or that's just a phrase you'll hear basically saying from the beginning to the end, or cradle to grave is another term you'll hear, where it's basically you'll see the whole thing as far as what's happened on this project, who's talked to who. So it's really useful, right? Because now you can basically read this and understand exactly what's happened. And so you want to basically acknowledge your manager. So you don't want to just ignore this, right? Because it's important. So when someone sends you this kind of thing, you want to just reply back and acknowledge this. So I've got a canned email that I've got written out here. So I'm just going to say like, Ted, that's exciting news. This email makes sense. And I look forward to the kickoff call on this project, right? So I'm going to just reply and paste this. Now I want you to obviously write this out. You can pause and write this out, and then you're going to hit send. And now that's going to get back to me, your manager. So if I'm Ted, I can see that Trainee01 has replied to me and has acknowledged that they're excited to do this project. So that's great, right? So, you want to do those little things like whenever your manager sends you an email to engage you on a new project, you don't want to ignore it. You want to reply back and say, oh, great, thanks. I'll definitely look forward to it. I read the whatever emails or documents you've sent me, and I'm looking forward to it, right? So now, given I'm probably more enthusiastic than some people, I have been accused of being cheesy and unnecessarily peppy about things or whatnot, but I don't think that's a bad thing. Personally, I've never had issues with my projects because people really like the fact that I'm enthusiastic. So you have to, use your own style and do whatever works for you. I like to use exclamation marks and things like that to show people that I'm excited and I'm interested in the project. If you don't want to do that, I understand in your own project. It's just a suggestion that I'm making. So you got to factor in whatever style works for you. But the main thing here is that you acknowledge and you are professional. So that's it. That's the end of this video. I hope that it made sense to understand kind of some parts of the cycle of this project and you start to see the different roles that exist in a project. Of course, if you have any other questions, please make sure to ask your trainer. We're always open. But yeah, that's it. We'll be continuing with the next video and we'll see the next step in this project.